If you've been around the channel for a little while, you should know by now that my relationship with speed painting is toxic. It's kinda like that one ex that you really miss, but you also know deep down that it just shouldn't work out between you two. Earlier this year, I made a video talking about my own experiences with speed painting and what I hate about it. Mostly, it boils down to this. Before, when I would speed paint, I'd get a little in my head, feeling like I've gotta rush through everything as fast as I can or I'm not really speed painting at all. It's a funny, stupid little hang-up, but honestly, one that still really bothered me. After painting those 10 Cadians, I walked away with, sure, a better perspective on speed painting, but still unsatisfied. Those models looked fine, and I enjoyed my time painting them, but they lacked a certain depth of color that I want out of a model. Layering is my favorite part of the process, and I didn't feel like I really had time to do that, at least not quickly. At the time, I just chalked it up as part of the speed painting process, and moved on with not really much to say. Now, what the hell does any of that rambling have to do with Slapchop? If you're not familiar, which I would certainly be surprised by given the fact that you clicked on this video, Slapchop is a method of painting where you prime a model black, spray, or dry brush, white from above, from the zenith of the model if you will, and then use contrast paints to actually apply color. It's kinda like a mini painter's coloring book. It's a fast method that incorporates both highlights and shadows into speed painting, which is honestly impressive in and of itself, but the models also look pretty good given just how little time you actually spend on each of them. But I hate it. Kind of. It's one of those things where I'll see somebody else do it, and I'll really appreciate it from across the table and think it looks pretty good, and then I'll pick up a brush to do it myself and just never walk away happy. My biggest problem with Slapchop is that every single model kind of looks the same. There's very little artistic expression you can put into a Slapchop model because it's so well optimized for speed. Everything will always be desaturated. Your darkest darks are always going to be black, and your brightest brights are always going to be white. That is just the nature of the beast. There's not really any other way around it. This, of course, means you don't really get much variety in texture or color for each material. Everything kind of blends together. It's technically harmonious, yeah, but in like a minimalist, safe to advertise way, like the inside of a Chipotle. Now, does this mean that it is a bad method? No, absolutely not. It is a certified, fast way of getting a model done and looking pretty good, which is always gonna look better than bare plastic. It's just not what I, personally, want out of a model. So why does any of that matter? Well, I am very quickly approaching the end of my 2,000 points of Painted Death Guard, and with that, I desperately need some units to play objectives for me. There is simply no better choice in the Codex than the Poxwalkers. These little zombie-like monsters are former humans infected with the walking pox, a disease that simultaneously kills and reanimates those infected into obedient drones for Nurgle's servants. The big thing is, though, each one of these models is roughly 6 points out of 2,000. Yeah, kinda can't justify spending a lot of time on each one of these guys, or I just won't ever have a finished army. So I set out with one goal: figure out how I can get the depth that I'm looking for while still going quickly. Today, instead of a normal kit, I'm going to be painting up some of these dead walker zombies from Age of Sigmar. The normal Poxwalker kit does look good, but they're also monopose as opposed to these zombies, which have some good variety to the options found in the kit. So while I prime these models black, let's talk about my approach to this. I have an admittedly very awkward path to tread in front of me. Skin turns into a kinda weirdly desaturated greenish, pink, gray color when it rots. This could very easily lead back into the too desaturated, boring look that I am trying very hard to avoid. As well, I want these guys to stay within the general grimdark scheme I've got from my prior Painted Death Guard, which means I can't let it get too cartoonishly bright as a lot of speed painting methods tend to lean towards. At the time, I wasn't completely sure how I was going to go about balancing both these points together, but I figured base coating with a yellow-green and Zenithal priming with a pale pink would get me some of the way there. Actually, that's way too bright on its own. Let's mix in some tan flesh to get this just a little bit darker. One of the big things that I hate about speed painting is that I feel like I never have enough time to paint what I want when I want. So today, I want to try to challenge that head on. Usually, each model has one material that I'm really excited to paint, and here, it was the flesh. Conveniently, this is also the biggest visual draw to the models, so by spending just a little bit of extra time here, I could make these models look way better than, "Hey mom, look, I spent 20 minutes on this," would suggest. To help reinforce the green notes of the skin, I mixed together a wash of Mortarion, Grime, and Poxwalker shade, thinning it down just a bit with some water. And right here is where I'd begin making some very unfortunate mistakes. I wanted to bring back some of that pale, nasty highlight, so I mixed some neutral gray, yellow green, and pale pink together. Here, I was focusing most of my attention on the shoulders and head, as that's what your eyes naturally wander towards, but I was still also getting a few different highlights on the arms and legs. I built up this brightness over the course of a couple of different layers, and yeah, this kinda sucks. In a way, I had kinda stumbled exactly into what I wanted to avoid. These models were monotone, safe, and really, really boring. I had ended up making these guys way too desaturated into the highlights, leaving me with only green and gray, which was kinda soulless. Admittedly, I did start a little too bright and desaturated, and probably should have used a much more saturated color like a pure pink for the Zenithal Prime. So I sat there mulling over my options when the biggest epiphany of my life suddenly hit me. I had accidentally stumbled into a much better version of Slapchop that had two major things going for me. The first is that while my highlights are relatively desaturated, the shadows are still nice and vibrant. This means I should be able to easily get the purplish tones I'm looking for really quickly. But another big benefit that I've got here is that I've used that same yellow-green from my shadows in my highlights. This means I had accidentally given myself a mother color, or a paint that you add to all of your others that helps to unify your scheme across the entire model. I have got an amazing opportunity to have some really good looking models done for next to no time, and none of the steps I've done this far were directly intentional. I don't know if that's a testament to my luck, or how dumb I am, or which of those two is actually worse. With the light bulb having gone off, I went ahead and mixed together a few different skin tones. By using a handful of contrast paints like Blood Angels Red, Magos Purple, and Talassar Blue, I could get some varied but all still interesting purple hues. I wanted some zombies to be a little darker and some a little brighter. The most important thing was that each of these paints was thinned very well with contrast medium and a touch of water. The last thing I want to do is lose all my interesting highlights and shadows in a sea of thick paint. With that dry, I went back in with some of that gray-pink highlight from before and hit the very brightest edges. I do try and stay a little careful to avoid the clothes and weapons the zombies are holding, but a little bit of spillover on the edges isn't going to be the end of the world on something as dirty and gross as these models. Now let's go ahead and work on the clothes and hair for these fellas. I did a little bit of research into dyes that medieval peasants would often have on hand and used that as a rough guide for my color choices. A lot of these are the expected earthy natural tones like greens, browns, and yellows. But apparently blue was also a very common dye thanks to the woad plant. Thanks, woad. So I thinned down a variety of contrast paints and got to work coloring in the different materials. I don't want to go overboard here, just using 6 or so different ones to have some variety while still feeling cohesive. For my brighter colors like Talassar Blue and Orc Flesh, I mixed in just a bit of Wyldwood Brown to darken them down a touch. Otherwise, these would be a bit too stark next to my very grimy Plague Marines. As I worked, I did try to keep these outfits feeling real. Like here, where this woman's got a blue skirt with a yellow top. It's bright, colorful, and I could totally see a real woman wearing this. Which actually makes painting this kinda sad in a way. Normally, I paint very over-the-top, magical sci-fi superhumans who fist-fight aliens with chainsaw swords, or monstrous demons who want to eat people's souls. You know, goofy shit, but these are just regular old people. Hell, any one of them could have been you or me. And something about taking the real, mundane, everyday things you come to see in life and brutally murdering the shit out of it is just really sad. Oh god, what am I feeling? Is that empathy? One major benefit to keeping your colors somewhat contained in quantity is that you can go through and very easily highlight each of them quickly. I'm not too concerned on being a perfect match for the color beneath, just being close enough that it looks right as a highlight color. For instance, here on the blue, I mixed together some dark gray blue, light gray, and yellow green to keep my mother color in play. None of these highlights were anything extreme other than giving a little bit of scratchy texture to the clothes and the occasional edge highlight like here on the wood. Just about done with these models, let's go ahead and do some metals. This is not gonna be complicated. I just base coated all the tools, shields, swords, etc. with dark silver, then washed them with some thinned agrax. I did, admittedly, go a little too heavy on this, but well, it's not ruined. Then I went back in with some bright silver and stippled some highlights onto any of the protruding flat areas, edges, etc. Finally, I went in with some galvanic rust, thinned it down, and added a few touches to the low points as a bit of excess grime. Now, basing should be very easy. The rest of my Death Guard have a trench warfare vibe going on with thick mud caked onto all the bases and treads. So I'm busting the jar of forbidden peanut butter back out and giving all the bases some of this Vallejo thick mud. Applying it is basically as straightforward as painting the bases, just making sure not to get too much mud onto the legs. I do still go through and add some to the bases of the dresses and pants to help them feel like they've been crawling through trenches. As well, on these guys who are carrying their own tombstones on their backs, which is metal as hell by the way, I caked a bit of extra mud on top of and around them. For one final detail on the model, I want to add some dry blood to a few different places like the open wounds, brains, and some of the weapons. I thinned my paint down here just a touch that didn't dry with too harsh of an edge. This did end up staying pretty subtle, but honestly, I think it adds a lot to the whole grimdark vibe for just a few extra minutes of effort. With a final touch of black primer around the base rims, my shambling horde was ready to hit the table. I've gotta say, I am in love with how these models turned out. All in all, this project took me about 6 or so hours, start to finish, not including drying times. That's nothing, actually. For 15 minutes a model, these have some really good depth and coloration that I'm honestly kinda surprised I fit into them in such a short time. I think the takeaway from this video is to just be a little more creative in how we go about painting. A simple change. Just changing the colors I used to prime these models and highlighting them a little bit afterwards made them look completely different in the end. So, yeah, I'm man enough to admit it. Slapchop doesn't need to be boring. I just was. Even if you're moving fast. Even if you're using a technique that doesn't exactly lend itself to very unique looking models, as long as you're paying attention to what steps you're doing and how they'll affect the later steps down the line, you can still end up with a model that still feels like you. Honestly, I think I've walked away from this whole experience with a much better appreciation for speed painting, even more so than I had last time I said that. I kinda get it now. Once I set myself free from the box of what I thought Slapchop had to be, and just let myself have some fun with it, I actually did. It's funny how that works. But that just leaves us with one final but much bigger problem. If I can't clickbait speed painting anymore, what the hell am I gonna do now? You can end up with something that still looks and feels like you. Maybe I shouldn't say looks. I don't look like a corpse.